Welcome everybody to Forza Horizon 4, and today we're taking a look at the 1988 Chevrolet Monte Carlo Super Sport. Now this is part of the 4th generation that was produced between 1981 and 1988. The SS was the Sporties version, which was introduced in 1983 after being 12 years absent from the Monte Carlo lineup. And it featured a rear spoiler, new front fascia, European body colour coding, front disc brakes, a Strato bucket seats, a rear sway bar and a more powerful V8 engine. And there are two things that I like about this car. First, I like the looks. I think it's really got real sense of presence to it. Especially since it looks quite menacing at the front at least. And secondly, I like the amount of space that it's got interior and in terms of boot. As you can see, plenty of space up front, especially even with those bucket seats, and plenty of space in the rear, plenty of headroom as well because it's quite a square car, and it's got a pretty sizable boot as well, as you can see, which is all very nice, even if it's a spare wheel in there with plenty of extra room for any luggage. But unfortunately this car does have a fair old amount of issues, chief among which is the gearbox, which might well be a 4-speed gearbox, but as you'll see when we get out on the open road, it's got a couple of issues with it. And then there's the engine, which, like plenty of other American cars from the 80s, is rather underpowered. It's a 5-litre V8 engine producing 180 horsepower and 225 pounds-feet of torque, which is pretty woeful, to be honest. Especially when you consider this car weighs 3,522 pounds, so it's hardly a lightweight car, and yet it's dealing with way less power than cars that are, way lighter than it as well. So massive disappointment. But it's not the only Chevrolet from the period that also had very little in the way of horsepower. You'd be lucky to get a Corvette with more than 250 horsepower, and even a Camaro was unlikely to have any more than that as well. So Chevrolets at the time were really rather underwhelming, but then again they weren't the only one. Ford with the same problem. The only car that I can think of from the time that was American that had 300 horsepower or more horsepower was a Buick GNX, so and that wasn't even a V8, so big problem for cars back in the time, but that does not mean that it's an excuse for this vehicle to have so little in the way of power, which really does come hit home when we get out onto the open road. So let's see what this car can do. So yeah, we're well under 200 horsepower and a lot of it in the way of weight, even though this is only a 2-door car. It's pretty inevitable that this isn't all that quick. And to top it all off, I don't even like the engine noise all that much, which I'll let you hear for a little while.
You have arrived at your destination.
So yeah, it's just a kind of a drone really. It's not exciting like V8s really should be, and typically American in terms of not having all that much in the way of revs. But yeah, to top it all off, it's the acceleration that really hits home in terms of how much of a non-performance car this is, despite being billed as a performance vehicle. 0 to 60 in 9 seconds, 0 to 128.4 seconds, and a top speed of 137 miles an hour. Now the top speed is decent, I'll give it that. It's certainly quicker than a lot of muscle cars from the 60s and 70s, but to have that amount of top speed, it has to have really rather long gears, which really does not help the power at all, because you've got these massively long gears which don't take advantage of the power when it peaks, or the torque when it peaks, so you just sat there waiting for the revs to slowly rise to the point that it needs to change gear. Now granted, obviously we can change it into manual on this game, but in real life this was only available with an automatic, so yeah, it's not going to be quite as bad as say a 3-speed automatic would have been, which was available on lesser Monte Carlos, but this was only available with a 4-speed automatic. And it's really rather quite bad, to be honest. Really does not make the most of what power and torque it has, so that's a bit of a problem. And then there's the handling, which granted is probably better than a standard Monte Carlo with that sway bar and the front disc brakes, but it's certainly not a good handling car. There's really no feel to what the car's going to do, and the suspension is still really rather quite soft, because you've got a massive amount of weight. having front discs alone is not enough to really help the car. Really would need disc brakes in the rear as well, especially if you're going to be stopping this from 130 miles an hour. You would not want to be dealing with drum brakes in the rear at those kinds of speeds. So yeah, it's not a great car in any means really. It's got presence in terms of style, and it's got plenty of room inside and in the boot, but that's all it really has going for it, to be honest. A Camaro with more power and even better looks would be the better option, because I'm pretty sure that's less practical really. And yeah, certainly more powerful, even though it's not anywhere near as powerful as you would like from a big V8 rear-wheel drive car that is supposed to be sporty, even if it is based on a luxury vehicle. And speaking of luxury, there's not much of it in this car. It's it's easily one of the blandest interiors I've ever seen on a supposedly luxury vehicle. I'm sure you've got dials that are in good place, clear to see and all that lot, but yeah, it looks very, very cheap and very under-equipped for a car that is supposed to be a luxury, well, personal luxury vehicle. So yeah, there's not much really going for this. I am glad it is on the game, no doubt about that, because it is one of the more unique American vehicles on this game and in the Forza series in general. But yeah, there are other vehicles out there that I would like from the same kind of time period, and ones that would certainly be a lot more fun to drive. A 80s Corvette would not go amiss, quite frankly. But nonetheless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.